Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Louis Boulet from lb-hockey.com, and we're diving into 10 players who we consider hidden gems who could really make a difference for your fantasy squads. Let's get to biz. Oh, yeah. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the number one fruit-based fantasy hockey podcast out there. That's confirmed, and we're proud of that. I'm your host, Blake Creamer. Please give me a follow over on X/Twitter and Blue Sky as well at Blake Creamer AG. And yeah, I've got a great guest here today, a friend of the show, creator of lb-hockey.com. It's Louis Boulet. Louis, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing phenomenally well, Blake. It's December. We're getting around to Christmas time. As I've told you before we started getting on, I've finished a lot of the stuff. I'm very happy with the state of where LB hockey is at. Now I have a little bit of time to take it a little easier and ease into Christmas.
Yeah, that's right. You rest up, King. You go get yourself a delicious Christmas dinner. All right, Louis has promised me a care package that he's sending over across country from the beautiful meal that him and his family are going to prepare over Christmas time. Thank you, Louis, for that. I really appreciate that. But yeah, Louis joined me for similar type episodes of what we're going to do here today in the off season. We are looking at players of interest that were going under the radar. And to me, that was some of the best content that we put out, in my opinion, in the off season. I really enjoyed that, Louis. And now I wanted to have you back because we actually have some data. Like, we have some data points to look at. We're 30, plus games into the season. And I just thought it would be really prudent to have you back on and we could dig in on some other under the radar players. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Make sure you head on over to YouTube and check us out here because we're going to be using a lot of data viz from LB Hockey, stuff that Louis creates. It's really good stuff. So you'll get the most out of it if you head on over to YouTube there. But before we do that, Louis, I would love to just kind of get your well, first off, you use a metric called SPAR percentage. And we're going to see that in some of these visuals that we're presenting here. And I was wondering if you could just quickly go over what that means for our listeners, just because we are going to see that metric. And I just want them to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, of course. So SPAR percent essentially is just it's a way to measure how a player contributes to their team. So it stands for standings points above replacement, so SPAR, and then percent just in percentile form. And luckily, I've just come out with an article kind of defining how we capture all of these different contributions over at LB Hockey and the various different skills that are put into this. So players' playmaking ability, how they play off the rush, how they defend in their own end, how they integrate themselves in passing sequences, their consistency game over game. And there's a bunch of different examples and just generally the entire method behind how we try to capture this. And that is our big one metric. Like when it comes to player evaluation, that is, if you had to boil it down to one number, I know we don't like to do that a lot because there's so many different things that factor into how a player contributes, but that is kind of our attempt at doing that. So if you're interested in it, just put out a big article diving into it and all of the different things that come together to kind of make that possible. So I highly recommend checking that out. Just published it, I think it was last week. So it's fresh on the mind for me. And again, I highly recommend it. It's part of our flagship Blueprint series, and I really like the work we've been doing with that.
Absolutely, buddy. And we'll link that article in the description of the show here, just so you can all check that out. Okay. All right, Louis. Well, with that, it's business time. We got to get to biz. Louis, do you ever just get to biz?
I mean, yeah, every once in a while, I would say. I'm in 3 of my own fantasy hockey leagues, so I feel like I got to get to biz pretty often. So okay. I think it's time.
I love to hear this. All right, we're brothers in biz. Okay. What we've got here for you today, we've got 5 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 2 goalies. We're going to be talking about, again, using metrics and data viz from lbhockey.com. So get on over to YouTube, check it out. We're going to get into the forwards first. And the first forward we want to talk about, Carter Swaggy Verhaeghe. Yeah, of the Florida Panthers. Definitely had a little bit of a come up here recently. He's on a bit of a hot streak, 13 points in the last 7 games. You love to see it. But, he has had, obviously, last season didn't go exactly as planned for him in terms of production. And I'm wondering now, Louis, because these are players that you kind of brought to the table and players that you're interested in. I'm wondering how you think Verhaeghe's production and play style has really been affected with Tkachuk and Barkov out so far this season, and what you're expecting moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird because you would expect, like we all know, it was, as you said, very underwhelming last season for Verhaeghe owners. Um, I don't think I personally had him, but I remember trying to trade for him early on, hoping it was a bit of an early dry spell, but it ended up spanning the entirety of the season. And it is kind of odd because despite having Barkov and Kachuk out this year, he's been excellent. Like, I know the production, 21 points in 27 games isn't like anything groundbreaking for him. He's definitely outperformed that. However, the tracking data that we have on him is really, really promising. Like, all of his with puck metrics. So we're looking at the new mini cards, which you can check out on LB Hockey, which are kind of distilled, more digestible versions of our main player cards, and these are spanning the last 3 seasons. But all of his with puck metrics, so the scoring, the playmaking, and the puck carrying, have all come back up after last season. They dropped to like post-COVID lows. Like, since 2020, last season, easily the lowest, down to around almost a little bit above league average, I'd say. And now for this season alone, they're almost all in the 90s. Like, and that's brought his 3-season sample back up very high. As you can see, 98 checking, which is really good. Like, his biggest weakness, if you can even call that, is like more of the defensive side. He's still above average, but that's the part that doesn't really matter as much in fantasy, right? So he's a high volume offensive piece who's also an excellent checker, and that's exactly what you want in terms of a fantasy player. Like, it's perfectly represented, I think, with the wrecking ball badge there. And that's the kind of player you want, a power forward who's going to make a lot happen. He's even got he's got that dog in him, So maybe if you have a league with high game-winning goal points, then that'll help as well.
Yeah, this is a player, obviously, I'm very interested in. I have been for a while, and because he's been able to get it done at even strength, and he hasn't really needed power play 1 at all times to really get to biz there. I mean, 67-point pace already this year, but only 5 of those points, 5 of his 23 points are power play points, right? And he's got a 50% power play share as usual, which is so strange for a great shooter like this. But yeah, I'm happy to see that his numbers are coming up, and I'm happy to hear that they're coming back up. I'm wondering, what adjustments has Florida made with Tkachuk and Barkov out? Do you think, is it Carter Verhaeghe and a lot of these Florida Panthers? They're so big on kind of dump the puck in and retrieve that puck. They're really big on that forecheck style. Is that still kind of what's going to work for Carter Verhaeghe, or is this a guy that's having to sort of create some plays off the rush? Because a lot of Florida Panther players don't really do that.
Yeah, I do think that's a really good point on the rush side of things. Like, the cycle offense numbers I have for Florida are still pretty low, especially relative to the forechecking, because that's just their bread and butter. This is what they do. This is how they've won their cups. But the rush offense has come up a lot in the last couple of years. Funnily enough, it was pretty good in 2021-22 and 2022-23 when they didn't win. And in the last 2 years, it took a dip in favor of more forecheck offense, and that won them their cups. But now it's back up, and you have a guy like Verhaeghe who's able to create off those chances way more, and that's enabling him to just use his toolkit in a more optimal manner. Obviously, he's still a great checker, and he's able to do stuff off of those plays, but adding an extra facet through which he can create and that the team is really able to play at the same level helps him a lot. And I wonder if when they get their supreme forecheckers, I know they're more than that, but that's a big part of their toolkit in Barkov and Tkachuk, if it's going to revert. I don't think as much, because you still have all of those other players, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, I'm just interested in that because teams like Florida and Carolina in particular have that kind of grinding style. And, when you're missing, like you said, their supreme forecheckers, Barkov in particular, who Carter Verhaeghe does get access to occasionally, more Tkachuk usually when they're both healthy. But yeah, all this to
both
say,
great rush players too, though, right? Like, it's a really interesting predicament to be in, and I'm intrigued to see how it does change or not in the new year.
Yep, for sure. Do you like Verhaeghe to continue kind of on this, 60 to 70 point pace moving forward?
I think so. I think it's a pretty good bet. Like, with all the data that suggests like the underlying suggesting that he's, back to where he was before, I do think some of it was just himself probably being a little tired last year with all of those runs, and
Sure.
probably the one this most recent season too didn't help. But I think he's just back on it now. And personally, as an Anton Lundell holder, I do hope he continues doing that, because more of the top six clicking for the Panthers is going to help for me there. So I'd say, personally speaking, I hope so, and I also think so.
Yep, I agree. I just picked him up in a spot. It's a 10-team league, and he was out there. And yeah, because he had kind of a slower start, but he's really picked it up, especially after he became a dad. He's got that dad strength out there. So
True.
he's doing stuff. I mean, 7 points in the last 4 games as well, including 5 goals for Verhaeghe. So this is a guy that needs to be rostered for sure if he's out there, if you're in a shallow league. But if you're holding him, I think he's a great piece. If you're looking to, like, he's not exactly a buy low because he's been scoring here, but hopefully you were able to get in on some Carter Verhaeghe here this season. All right, let's move on to another player who I love. I love this player, Aliaksai Protas.
Yes.
I was glad you brought him to the table. Yeah, he's one of my favorite players to watch, first off. And he's a guy that really, he's one of the players that I identified as a guy that made me want to dig into more of the why, because he doesn't show out in some of the individual chance and shot metrics that I normally look at, right? He's not really a guy that does that. So obviously there's something else that he's doing that allows him to be so successful. And yeah, even with like little to no power play time. So I'd love to get your take on Aliaksai Protas and what it is that makes this guy rosterable for fantasy, because I think he is on the bubble on some people's teams. I have him on 3 spots and I'm not letting go. All right. Cause I just love Aliaksai Protas. I mean, if I have to, I will, damn it. But I love the deployment, and I love what he's able to generate. And I'd love to get your take on why he's able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Funny you mentioned that on the, he might be on the bubble for them, because he was actually a keeper in my keeper league for someone in my league. So he is definitely a great player. I do think he's part of this wave of, he's one of the most hip players to follow, if that makes sense. Like, he's really fascinating the way he's evolved, and specifically how he's like steadily improved year over year. I don't think there's a lot of players like that. Obviously we can see it, and we'll dive into this chart more very soon, but you could see it here. You can see it in his SPAR percent. Like, there are not many players who grow just a little bit and like enough every single year. Usually there's at least a bit of a dip or a bit of a spike up and then dip or something like that. But him, it's just getting better every year. And kind of how he's evolved his toolkit to allow for that is really what fascinates me. Like, his overall SPAR contributed has improved every season. And I think the best way to look at that is how he has evolved as a piece within Washington's offensive schemes. And that's where the offensive puck movement profile that Blake has put up here really shines, and how we can kind of evaluate this. So he started out as more of a support role. He's a big guy, kind of a shutdown player who's still good at keeping possessions moving. So the efficiency was pretty high. The thing that you'll notice, though, it still is, and he's just added more layers to how he can contribute. So he can still do that, but he's added like an extra facet of like how he can command passing plays and put his kind of just add some influence over how they develop, instead of just being a guy who exists to make them more efficient. And kind of turning from a shutdown forward into a utility power forward, and now like a true power playmaker. There's not many guys that can kind of change their toolkit year over year to allow for their impact to grow. And that's really what entices me to kind of keep my eye on him. And I mean, at this point, I'd have to trade for him in fantasy for sure. But this is the type of guy that is good enough for me to consider it, definitely.
Yeah. I had Protas on a couple spots, and I talked about him in the offseason as well as a player that I was interested in. I think we talked about him as a player of interest in one of our shows.
Probably.
Yeah, because
I like him. So yes.
Yeah, me too. And I like what you said. Like, yeah, he is an efficient player, and I think we all expected that to come down. Like, the guy shot 21% last year, 71-point pace, but he's still efficient this year. Yeah, it fell off a little bit, but not off a cliff. He's shooting 15.6%, right? He's on a 55-point pace, which is, yeah, to be expected. But one of the things I noticed when I was digging in on Protas is his IPP. His IPP at 5-on-5 is down 20%. Right? Like, down to in the 53 as opposed to like 83, which is high, but I think 53 is a little bit low. Do you think that that has a potential of coming up because some of the other metrics at 5-on-5 look pretty good. Like his shot totals look really good. He's shooting a lot more. Obviously, getting similar scoring chances as well. Do you think he'll get a little bit more involved in the play, and maybe he's just been a little bit unlucky? Maybe some third assists in there.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is because of how much he's contributing in their passing sequences, and he's still kind of getting used to this bigger role on those sequences. I think that will come up, the IPP, because he's contributing so much already on those plays. He's probably just being that final guy who gets cut off of the points scoring, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't worry about it. I think it'll come back up. Again, like he does so much both as a scorer and as a playmaker, and that'll be a trend that we'll see a lot. Is I was specifically targeting guys that can kind of do both, because that gives you a bit of a net if one of the two falls off. And Protas is really the nice first example that we're diving into here. But he's the type of guy that I think, yeah, like despite already being pretty good this year, I could totally see it kind of take it to another level before the season ends.
Absolutely, buddy. What do you think his point pace might be rest of season? So he's on a 55 point pace. What do you think he finishes with this year?
I could see it hit 60. I think it'll probably still be a little difficult just because of the way Washington is, right? There's just so many different players that could like vie for like a big spot on that team. I don't know where exactly he's playing on that power play either. And that's probably
he's PP2, so he's not getting he's not getting a look really.
Exactly. So that one kind of makes me wonder. I don't know if he will. Still a phenomenal player, but yeah, I'd be happy to see it hit 60. But even if he stays on the current one, he's definitely, with everything that he brings and the checking ability and all of that, and some of the peripherals, perhaps, I think that's still pretty solid. 55 to 60 seems like a good range for me.
Yep, I really like that. And that's going to be a valuable player. And I think that's a player that should be on your roster, right? So, yeah, shout out to Aliaksai Protas. Glad you brought him up. Go watch some of this man's game tape. Holy moly. Guy's a legend. Let's talk about Jason Peterka of the Utah Mammoth. I'm glad you brought this player up as well. Obviously, he had kind of an interesting start there in Utah. They signed him to a big contract, and they proceeded to put him on line 2, power play 2, and kind of didn't give him that real offensive run that I think, fantasy managers were hoping for. But things have been trending upward for sure. He's got line 1, power play 1 now, a really good deployment, and he's definitely been efficient. What do you think about JJ Peterka? Do you think now with this increase in role, do you think he's truly going to reach that potential that we saw in Buffalo and now here in Utah?
I definitely think so. Yeah, like I was one of the ones who really wanted Peterka to be a Senator when there were rumors.
Yeah, we wanted him in Vancouver too.
Yeah, that's the thing is everybody knows how much of a talented young piece he is. He can create for himself. He can create for others. He can do it off the rush or the cycle. Like he's just everywhere offensively. He's very talented and capable to create. The thing we don't talk about enough, I think you mentioned his efficiency. But like he has legitimately been one of the league's most underrated finishers over the last 3 years. I believe he was around 85th percentile in finishing amongst forwards in each of the last 3 seasons, and is currently top 3 in my data set for 2025-26. The thing that kind of pops up to me in that case is, okay, if he's so good and if he's so able to create and getting all those chances, why doesn't he have more than just like 12 goals, right? And part of that could be deployment, but I do think there's a little bit in how his game kind of devolves that does affect that. And we can see it best with the development matrix here. So the way this, I'll just give a quick rundown of how this works. The main part is the right, like the 4 squares. On the bottom, you have on the x-axis, you have a player's frequency, so how often they use specific skills. And on the y-axis, you have the success rate. So in the top left, you'll have skills that they are very good at but don't use often. Bottom right, things that they use often but aren't great at, so you'll want to address that. But if we look here at the top, around the top middle left, you have his close finishing. So he's one of the best at, finishing chances in tight. The problem is, he probably doesn't leverage that skill as much as he should. He's a great long-range finisher, and his shot selection outside of in tight is really, really solid. I do wonder, now that, Cooley is out and he's got a more cemented spot on PP1, and that the kind of adjustment period on a new team is over, like he's got, 3 goals, 7 points in his last 6 games. That's pretty good. He might be in a spot where he's able to use those hands in tight a little more, right? And that could really, really see a big increase in points and fantasy production as a result.
Yeah, I love that. I really like this viz that you put here. I always have to kind of,
My favorite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for explaining it again, because sometimes I dig in and I'm like just trying to.
It's a lot for sure. It definitely it's definitely the one that takes the longest to digest, but I think the insights you can get from it make it worth it. I've tried a lot to kind of try to boil it down, but it's hard to just by the nature of what it is, right?
Yeah. The way you explained it was really succinct. So, yeah, this is one I really like things that he's good at and does all the time. Like I really think that's important.
He's got a really efficient toolkit. Like there's barely anything in the red there. If anything, there's a couple more skills that he should promote, but the rest he's using at a very, very good pace.
Yeah, absolutely. He's an exciting player, and I think that there are things like individual shot and chance generation that are lower than they've been previously for this player. But in terms of efficiency, yeah, it's off the charts. Like at 5-on-5, he's got a career high 81% IPP. That's like superstar level stuff, right?
Wow.
Driving play to a crazy level, and he's only has a 59-point pace, right? So I think where I would love to see an improvement for JJ Peterka is on the power play. My God, John Jason, what are you doing out there? He's got 1 power play point in 32 games. That's insane. And, in fairness to him, he's up to this point, he's only had a 38% power play share. So that's why I think this is the ground floor on Peterka. Like we're looking at a 59-point pace with no power play points. And now he's bumped up to power play 1. I think Clayton Keller has been muted so far this season. I think there's more in the tank there. I think, I think that Utah power play has been kind of gross and, but it shouldn't be. I feel like with the talent they have there, they should be doing a lot better. I think, yeah, they're 29th in power play percentage. What the hell?
That's crazy. Like you have one of the best shots in the league in Dylan Gunther there as your long range option, right? Like, and you have a playmaker like Keller who should be able to set him up. You have a guy like Peterka who you could probably put in the mid to high slot because of how good he is at scoring. And you have a bunch of defensive options who can move the puck that you can put at the top of that umbrella if that's what they're running. It is crazy to me. And you're right. The power play production for Peterka should be clicking in soon. And I'm just going to say, watch out when it starts doing so.
I think so, man. I think we're looking at a 70-point player, like 70, 75-point player, if all goes well, right? Because of this efficiency. And, one last thing on Peterka, do you believe this efficiency is sustainable? Like what you've seen over the last few seasons, does that sort of give you confidence that this level of efficiency for Peterka is sustainable?
I do think so, like especially because of how he's been able to at least maintain, if not grow a little bit on a lot of his skills over the last 3 years. If, for example, he was one of the best finishers in the league this year, but wasn't in years past, I think that would definitely be tough. Like one of the things I looked at in the article I mentioned is when we're trying to weigh which skills are more important. One of the things that are very important is repeatability, right? And I found that finishing, as expected, is really hard to maintain year over year, except for those very elite players. And Peterka kind of falls in that upper echelon of players who is just able to convert on his chances close or far year after year. So I do think that that's the kind of player that's going to be able to maintain this. And as you said, I do think this is the ground floor. So buy now on Peterka.
Oh, hell yes. You bet your sweet bippy you're buying on Peterka. He's like a young Leon Draisaitl out there. All right. Is that what you're saying, Louis?
Well, I don't know about that.
All right. Okay. No, that's completely false. All right. Okay. Let's move on to another player here. We got to talk about the Fresh Prince, Will Smith. Yeah. Love that. Again, great player that you brought up because this is a guy that I don't have anywhere. And we've dug in on some of the metrics, but I'm just interested in getting more of your take and why he is having this success because obviously it's an amazing start, 77-point pace for Will Smith. He's tied to Macklin Celebrini, who's proven so far to be the generational talent as advertised. He's been amazing out there. But, when I dig in on San Jose's team metrics, San Jose is 31st in the league in expected goals for, just according to hockeystats.com at 5-on-5.
Yeah.
But they're finishing at the 6th best rate. So my question to you is what do you like about Will Smith so far? And do you think that his point pace is sustainable in this current offensive environment?
So Smith is definitely the player that's at least the production hasn't started clicking yet. But if the underlyings are good, the production is there. The
Mhm.
thing with me with Will Smith is he's kind of become one of my favorite like little guys to keep track of over the last year. Um, there are two things that stand out for me with him, and this one kind of really goes back to when he was drafted. He's just one of the smartest off puck threats in the game already. I find as somebody who in my own beer league games, in my own hockey, I do think that I put so much importance on just kind of sneakily sliding into open pockets of space to get open for your teammates. And that is exactly what Will Smith does so well. He just slips behind the defenseman, he gets open, and the fact that he has a guy like Macklin who can find him for those, it just gels so well, right? So that's why I think there's a level of sustainability there for sure. And just, the skill he has with his hands means I think the finishing is also pretty, maybe not high level sustainable yet. I still want to see a little bit more to make sure and have a bigger sample, but I think there's a very high floor there at the very least. The thing that really interests me with him though is when he first got into the NHL, he was so afraid of contact, and that limited his value big time. So it would make sense that he relied on his off puck offensive threat because that's when he's least susceptible to pressure, right? And I wrote a lot about defining physicality in the summer, another plug for one of my articles. And Will Smith ended up being kind of the main focus in terms of how it affects player development. And just seeing him start to embrace that physicality at the NHL level has allowed every part of his game to blossom. Because now we can utilize those smarts to kind of invite contact, create a sort of like planetary gravity around him. And that draws in players and opens up space for his own playmaking because now his teammates are open since the other guys kind of came in to try to cover him. And now he's sneaking more off puck lower into the zone where usually he would have been a little bit more scared to do that. And we can see this here in his consistency spread. So the little white line is his decade average game score. So think about like as games get added, kind of where his average performance lies. If it's you can see at the start in the first few games it was around like league average, 60th percentile, and then the data stabilized around 30th. And that's when he started embracing physicality a little bit more. And I talked to a lot of Sharks fan friends of mine to make sure that, this was kind of lining up. And as he started kind of learning how to play through all that contact, you could see he was just steadily improving as the year went on. And now he's turned into like almost first line level ability to play through contact. And that's really, really interesting to me. He's even a top 10 most improved forward in our data for 2025-26. So this is a player that I think is really interesting just because of the different nuances and how his game has evolved. And I think that self-identification of weaknesses mindset is really a way for him to continue growing and something that I truly believe in because it's a part of a player's brain that I put a lot of emphasis on when scouting for the draft. And it's definitely something that Will Smith has and I'm keeping an eye on to continue helping him grow and produce in fantasy.
I'd love to hear that. I could listen to that all day. That's so interesting, man. Yeah, just like kind of explaining the development of a player and sort of the tipping point where something changes and looking at the actual data and watching it grow from that point. Playing through contact, that's really interesting. Yeah, it makes me think too with Will Smith. So I'm high on the player as well, but I guess I wasn't last year for sure because they were doing kind of load management and it wasn't a good year for San Jose, but yeah, definitely seems like a different player this year. Do you think that Will Smith is a guy that needs Celebrini for his production? Like obviously it's going to raise his ceiling. If he's without Celebrini, is this a player that can drive play on his own?
I think there's been flashes showing that he probably can. Like you look at his game, would have been 2 nights ago against Philly when we're recording, and he had that assist on the Colin Graff goal where he did exactly what I just said, right? Where he's dumping it in, or following a dump in, retrieving a puck. Already, you're engaging on the forecheck more than he was before, going behind the net while pressured, drawing guys in, and using it to start the high danger passing sequence that results in the Colin Graff goal. So I think that's a sign that he's getting to that point where he can and doing this already at the age of, I think, I don't even know if he's 20
Yeah,
already. I think he is.
20, yeah.
It's showing that he probably can. Having a guy like Celebrini, as I mentioned, the way those two guys play with the brain and passing ability of Celebrini and the way Smith can kind of perfectly play off of that off puck offensively, obviously it's great to have them together. But in the case where they do get split up, like on the power play, I don't think they're together, right? I think Smith is playing PP2 right now. I don't know if that's been the case all year, but I checked earlier today and I was kind of baffled to see that. So if that's been the case all year and he's doing what he already is, and probably, let's be honest, going to get PP1 probably by the end of the year, that is really enticing. And that's a guy I'd be looking to acquire.
Yeah, absolutely. He does have a 60% power play share, but as of late, he has been on power play too. So yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, these coaches galaxy brain stuff all the time. It's like, why don't you put your best players on the power play? I understand there's handedness and, you know, you got to have the right people in the right position. But I mean, that's a team that's kind of thin on talent. You know what I mean? So hopefully we see Will Smith back out there sooner rather than later. But he's had a great start. There's no question. 77-point pace. I mean, what do you think? To me, that seems a little bit high. I could see him touching 70 this year. I could see 65 to 70 for Will Smith, and that would be a massive success.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's a good range.
Yeah, cool. All right, Will Smith, thank you, buddy. Love that stuff. All right, let's talk about one more. We got to talk about Jordan Kyrou. He's Apples and Ginos' favorite, but he's always tooting right in our face, Louis. All right, he's not getting the biz, but it's more the coaches, I think, than Jordan Kyrou. But and obviously he's injured right now. But you know, this is a good data point for you all as well. If he's out there on your wire and you can add him straight to IR, like I like Jordan Kyrou a lot. I think that he's always been a player of interest to me just due to his ability to generate shots and chances right on his own. But Louis, what do you think? And I want to hear obviously your kind of bull case for Jordan Kyrou, but what do you think it is about his style of play that keeps him from getting top line power play and top line minutes with multiple coaches now?
Honestly, I think he's probably one of the biggest enigmas in my data because you're right. He should be doing so much more. I do think that players like him who maybe kind of fall in the Matt Barzal mold where they're so talented and so much of what they do is just puck carrying and off the rush play to establish possessions are like you're using a lot of the talent for that and less for the production. The thing with Kyrou is like he's another guy who's been one of the most consistent top level finishers in the league, right? Again, you're looking year over year and he keeps ranking towards the top of the league. And it's interesting because when I brought him up for this podcast and I was like doing my initial pre-scout as I do for every player just to congregate all the vizzes that we're going to post, it's like everything should indicate like a point per game player, you know, the ability to create for himself, the playmaking, all of the work on entries, you know, he's easily the most dynamic piece on a very suboptimal Blues team, and we can see that with the team blueprints here. You know, the Blues are producing at an average level, I guess, offensively in kind of every facet, average at best, I'd say. And we can see here all the superlatives are just Jordan Kyrou, best scoring threat on the team, Jordan Kyrou, best puck carrier, Jordan Kyrou, best play driver, Jordan Kyrou. You know, and I actually looked into the raw data behind some of the codes for the breakout candidate badge. His current point pace is 47. Last time I updated, and currently with how his toolkit profiles and everything he's been able to do, he should be producing around an 83 point pace.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense. He should erupt offensively anytime now. I honestly think with all the rumors of him being traded away from St. Louis, it's going to happen. It's just if he gets traded to another team, I think the boost will be even bigger.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? His name is always in these trade rumors of players coming out of St. Louis there. But yeah, like you said, it's an enigma, and it is for us as well. Like, you know, you draft the guy looking at everything under the hood and what he's doing, and he just can't get over the hump in terms of deployment, right? And we've seen it with multiple coaches now. Very frustrating, but he's obviously injured right now. But I mean, the 3 games he played before that, he had 2 points, but the underlying metrics pretty damn good in the stuff we look at here, like from natural stat trick. Shots to go over 60, 49th overall in that time. Short, small sample size, but he's number 1 overall in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60 over that time. You know, but I mean, brutal like deployment. What the hell? I mean,
deployment is crazy to me. I don't get this. Like, I know he's been healthy scratched, which is bonkers because this year, in terms of like his help on defending like cycles and just generally suppressing chances, has been great. He's the kind of guy who gets involved in your D zone, doesn't turn it over on breakouts, and gets it out cleanly, all while suppressing chances pretty well. And in past years, it's not like he was atrocious. I'd say he was around league average for a forward. It doesn't make sense to me. He is the enigma in my data set, and I don't get it.
You wonder if the guy's just a dink. You know what I mean? Is he just a dink in the dressing room, just pissing the coaches off, like mouthing them off and stuff? Maybe. All right. I don't want to slander Jordan Kyrou because he's a beautiful man with a lovely head of hair. All right. But yeah, it's needless to say, I'm still really high on the player. I'm not dropping. I've got him on 2 teams and I'm holding, but 47-point pace, pretty stinky. I think what Louis is saying, and I absolutely agree, is that the underlyings are really, really good, right? So this is one of those players that it's just a data point. You know, if you have to drop them, go ahead, but just know that you're dropping a player that is ready to really pop for fantasy, like to a point per game level. It's just, yeah, there's some variables that are just not happening for him right now. And yeah, hopefully he does come back from this injury feeling refreshed and fully healthy so we can see full Kyrou. All right. And then we can be vindicated, right, Louis?
Keeping him on your injured slot. No hurt in keeping him on your injured slot for now. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
You know, just wait it out for now and see what he does when he returns.
You heard it here first, folks. All right. We got to talk about some defensemen here, Louis. All right. And this is really cool because, yeah, Louis brought the players to this pod here, and a bunch of them were really good up and coming young defensemen. And this is where I think a lot of value can be had in fantasy. Like the players we talked about in forward, a lot of those players are going to be rostered. But I think, you know, some of these defensemen that we're talking about, these guys are out there. They could be on your wire. Definitely something to think about. But let's dive in and some of these players here. The first one I want to talk about is Brandt Clarke. And I'm, again, very glad you brought this player up because I just did a buy low show a week ago, and Brandt Clarke was one of them. This was right before Drew Doughty came back, and I had a hard time deciding if I wanted to keep him on there. But I looked at the underlyings that I'm interested in, and I was like, yeah, no, we need to have him on there because his time on ice is actually going up. And even on power play too, I still think Brandt Clarke is a guy that can absolutely do things for fantasy. But I just love to get your analysis here, Louis, on, you know, the talent of this player and what your thoughts are, Brandt Clarke, if he doesn't get power play 1. Like what are your expectations for a player like this?
So I've kept track of Brandt Clarke for a while now. Like I was following the 67s team that has had his brother. So I was really hoping somehow there'd be a way that those two would be bad. No, we're not doing that.
Sorry about this.
For the audio listeners, Blake just did a 6-7 meme when I
said that. Allegedly.
I'm the Gen Z here, and I didn't even do that. Come on.
Sorry about this. I have 2 young kids, and this is all I hear. Okay, so I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you should see how bad it is at 67's games. It's crazy.
I can't imagine. They needed to change their name potentially.
Oh no, they've completely embraced it. They're getting like merch orders from Idaho supporting the meme. It's great. They're loving it. I actually
love that.
I'm really happy that they are. Yeah,
that's amazing.
100%. Great tarps. Right. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, back to Brandt Clarke. Yeah, he's perhaps, like, I think the D-man most primed to break out anytime now. As you said, the ice time is coming up, and that's always a huge factor. But he's currently on I think, 38-point pace. And according to our model, like I said with Kyrou, he's currently on a 38, deserves to be closer to around 60, according to that, which is phenomenal for defensemen. And the reason behind that is just he's an absolute demon with the puck. Like this guy in transition, we can see all those transition numbers up here, everything. And even the defensive transition metrics, which are usually one of the toughest things to really get good at as a more offensively geared young D-man, he has done excellently there. And that's why I think some of the ice time is coming up, right? Because he's getting the trust from his coaches because he's shown how well he can defend there. And that's just allowing him to leverage his offense more because he's getting more opportunity as a result. Like in transition, he's a beast. On the cycle, he's a scoring threat himself. All over the ice, he's making plays with his passing too. Like he's just an uber dynamic piece with the pedigree to be a true number 1 offensive D. And, you know, once that time on ice reaches, you know, the level of more of a first pair guy rather than around average 5v5 minutes, the explosion is going to be pretty hard to miss.
I love to hear it. I am still like, what is Jim Hiller doing? I don't know. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm even digging in just on his recent ice time here. Like, he had a stretch there. It was like 10 plus games of 20 plus minutes. And the last 3 games, 1736, 1648, and 1611.
Sub 17, man. What are we doing?
So if you were Jim Hiller, let's do a hypothetical here. What would your explanation be for not putting Brandt Clarke in every offensive situation, especially considering the Kings are 29th in goals for at 5-on-5. They're 31st in power play percentage. Like, what reason could Jim Hiller possibly have to be kind of keeping Brandt Clarke's ice time at this level? Like, are there weaknesses in his profile that you're seeing?
No, like not this season. In the past, there's obviously been things with Brandt Clarke. For example, he didn't even get an invite to the World Juniors that one year. And I think some of that may have been just disagreements and character issues specifically with that coaching staff. And they thought maybe he was a little too cocky from what I remember. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I recall. So I don't think it's a character issue at the NHL level right now, but he's always kind of had more the reputation of not being as good defensively, but he's worked on that a lot. And what we're showing here is his 3-year sample. But I've pulled up his single season and looking at his mini card for it. Like, there's no reason for him not to play offensively. He's 98th percentile amongst defensemen in playmaking ability, 94th in individual scoring, and he's playing the role that a true two-way defenseman should, in the sense that his rush defense and cycle defense numbers are 92nd percentile or higher. And even his checking ability, which, he's always been said to be more of a finesse player rather than one who really embraces the physical side, but his checking is at the 79th percentile. It doesn't really make any sense to me. I understand that there's maybe some sort of reputation attached to him, but in terms of on-ice numbers, you can't deny how good this guy has been everywhere. And, even just having Erik Karlsson in his number one similar style, I think, maybe not quite to that talent level, but in terms of how he plays, you can't deny that kind of toolkit in offensive situations if you're a coach.
Yeah. What do you think would happen if Brandt Clarke got like 20 plus minutes? Do you think he'd be able to handle that, for a full season's workload?
I think so. Yeah, I could definitely see it. Like, we're talking about just like 20, like low 20s in minutes. I think he definitely could. He, as you said, he had that stretch where he was playing that. Obviously, there's likely going to be a bit of an adjustment period early on, but he has the pedigree. He was drafted in the top 10. He's always been a high level player. I think he was a top 4 pick in the OHL draft. He's always kind of had that level of, he needs to be relied upon offensively and play a lot of minutes, especially offensively, that I don't think it would be an issue.
Yeah, it's wild stuff to me. I mean, yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but I think what we, hopefully our listeners can take from this conversation and ones I've had previously, yeah, this is a guy, if given the opportunity, is going to, everything is on his side for him to break out potentially. Like, and we're not talking a crazy breakout, but like a 50-point pace for Brandt Clarke. If he started getting 20 plus minutes, I think that is reasonable, right? And a 50-point defenseman that you can find on your waiver wire that, honestly, if things go really right, has a ceiling for more. I think that's a guy you should certainly be interested in, if not having on your roster as a 4th or 5th D-man. My 2 cents. Shout out to Brandt Clarke. Let's move on. This is a player I'm very interested in because it's not a guy I've dug in on at all. And we're talking about Nick Blankenburg of the Nashville Predators, the lowly Nashville Predators. Oh my gosh. But we got a bright spot here in Nick Blankenburg. This is it's been an interesting guy. It's like this guy's been on my radar, but I haven't had any need to pick him up for my teams, or it hasn't worked schedule wise. But I mean, he's doing pretty well. Like, he has, what has he got? 12 points in 19 games. It's on a 52-point pace. Nick Blankenburg, folks. Like, and that's in only 18:43 average time on ice. So Louis, tell me, what do you like about this player, and what does he need to do to receive more ice time from Coach Andrew Brunette?
So, as you said, this is definitely the most far out pick of anyone in this. I think a lot of the players that we've talked about are probably like on teams or close to being on teams, but Blankenburg is, I would say, I'd have to actually look at the numbers, but he's probably the one that's the least rostered out of anyone that
I'm sure he is,
and will talk about today. And, he's part of that is just playing on the Preds. And I do think that has helped him, because with the Roman Josi injury earlier on, he really has been able to step into a position where he can go from more of a roster tweener to an actual PP staple there. Yes, I know Josi is back, and we'll see what happens now that he's no longer like playing a ton on the power play and demoted to the second unit. But he's still got excellent offensive metrics. Like, he's a top 10% scorer in our model amongst D-men this year. He's projected to get, like, looking at even, taking his entire toolkit into account, he's projected to get like in the, like, around like 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 million on his next contract. And that's a big increase from, league minimum, which is what he's currently on. And I know this is more of a long-term thing, but man, if he can get that from a non-Nashville team next year in free agency, that would be pretty good. And I think that's just an indicator of how well he's been playing. I do think if I'm Nashville, I got to look at my defensive situation currently and realize I need to play this guy more, because at 5-on-5, he is not getting nearly enough minutes. I think they're rolling 11-7 even currently. And I just think that's not good enough. But despite that, the reason I brought him up is because I was looking at defensemen in my keeper league, it's a 12-man league, near basic settings, some little tweaks, but pretty close to the usual Yahoo fantasy settings, the default. And he's top 3 in average season points amongst available D-men there, with Radko Gudas and I think Caden Gooley, because of his injury, hasn't really played that much. So I don't really count him there, but it's literally him and Gudas, the top 2 available defensemen. And I think this is really a guy who, he wasn't on many people's radars, but he was, I think, one of the more sought after college UFAs when he finished his season his career in the NCAA. So it's a guy I'm going to keep an eye on. I don't know if I've given everybody the go ahead to pick him up yet, but he's definitely one of those where there's a big opportunity for potential if he gets the right deployment coming up soon.
Yeah. And, just digging in on him a little bit here, just on natural stat trick too, like his IPP at 5-on-5, similar to Brandt Clarke's, right? They're both, sky high in the 60th percentile, right? Which is really, really high for defensemen. But that doesn't happen by accident. Like, we have a decent sample size. He's got 19 games here, and he's been in on all 60% of the goals at 5-on-5. So I do like this player a lot. I'm like you said, I'm not sure we're adding at this point, but we're certainly watching the player. The situation when Roman Josi was out was a better one for Blankenburg. He was getting, some games where he was playing over 20 minutes, which was really nice. Now he's kind of back down to Brandt Clarke numbers as well, right? Last 4 games, 17-20, 16-30, 16-56. And then in the last game against Colorado, 12-37. Oh, man, that stinks.
Yeah.
Like, this is a team that's starved for goals. So I don't know, Jim Hiller and Andrew Burnett, maybe they're golfing buddies or something, just talking strategy out there on the course. Guys, what are you doing? All right, we got some good offensive defensemen here and 2 teams that are starved for offense. So I think there are a couple similarities there. I mean, obviously Blankenburg's not Brandt Clarke, but definitely players that can do things for fantasy. So I'm glad you brought him up. We'll see what happens. When is his contract up, actually? Is he up at the end of the year here?
Yeah. He should be a UFA after this season.
This is a guy we should be getting on. You should be getting on your squad and feeding him minutes. I never understand these teams that are doing poorly, that don't play the hell out of certain young players and see what they have.
I don't get it. Like, they're playing Nick Hague, Adam Wilsby, and Spencer Stastny over him. Like, I don't get it. Freddie Shea hasn't been great since coming to Nashville either. Yep. Like, you could argue that after Josi, he's kind of been their best defenseman this season, and Josi hasn't even really played all year.
Yeah. So, certainly offensively, I mean, this guy's he's got some bits and pieces, right? So I think it's a player that you should definitely put on your watch list. Shout out to Nick Blankenburg. Let's talk about one more young defenseman here. I had to look up how to pronounce this man's name because I wanted to do it properly. Szymon Nemec. That's the official Szymon. Szymon. You ever did like Michael Jackson? Szymon.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that, Louis. This guy.
I'm used to it at this point. It's fine.
yeah. You've been on the pod enough. You know what's going on.
Yeah.
All right, and this is what you signed up for, Louis. Okay, so that's your fault. Okay.
True.
Yeah.
I only have myself to blame.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're taking responsibility. Szymon Nemec. Szymon. He's had a nice little glow up here with the Devils. Started getting ice time kind of out of the blue. Like, he was getting that Nick Blankenburg, Brandt Clarke treatment to start the year. And then all of a sudden, he's just started playing like one game. I think it was November 8th. I'm just looking in his game logs here. Played 26 minutes, and then it's been 20 plus minutes ever since that time, minus 2 games that he did play under 20 minutes. But I love the deployment there. He had a hat trick in that one game. That was amazing. He's had a couple overtime goals. Like, what is it that this guy is doing out there that's kind of allowed him to get that ice time, because maybe this is a case of a young defenseman who we like and has great offensive metrics who is getting the ice time. So do you see any kind of comparison between him and the other two defensemen and what Nemec might be doing better than those two to get that ice time?
Definitely, yeah. Like as I think the Clarke comparison is really solid. You know, he's another guy that was drafted really high. He was what, second or third overall in 2022. Really, really, really good defenseman. And to me, as you said, going from being kind of the main piece included in potential trade talks, especially with all the Quinn Hughes stuff. My apologies,
I don't want to
by
hear
the way.
this. For God's sake.
But yeah, I honestly do think that because I do have Dougie Hamilton in one of my leagues, and he had his bi-yearly injury earlier in November, and I think that probably correlated with Nemec's increase in ice time. Luke Hughes not being, as good as he probably would have hoped so far this season is helping there, but Nemec has taken a stranglehold of that power play. He's just been so opportunistic with what he's been given, and he does rank as the most improved defenseman in our cards this season. And the other ones nearby are closer to more like bounce back candidates, something like an Oliver Ekman-Larsson or like a John Carlson or something like that. So he's really like the ultimate breaking out defenseman so far in the league this year. Like Brandt Clarke is close, but we need a little bit more for him to really start that explosion, whereas Nemec is in the midst of it right now. And he's another type of player where, similarly to Clarke, actually, the more I look into it, the closer the parallels get. But for Nemec, I think the man-on-man defense has taken a big step, and that's allowed the coaching staff to trust him more and put him in more situations where he can leverage his offense, right? Like the offensive improvements, especially though, are sparkling. Like we're looking at it here with the progression tracker and looking at how his shooting, passing, and ability to attack in transition have all skyrocketed over the last few years. He was on pace for 12 points last year, up to 42 now, and so much of that is due to him being, I think, one of the top 5 defensemen in terms of attacking off the rush, and in the same group as like guys like Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, Matthew Schaefer, Erik Karlsson. Like the way he's just able to score from the blue line and kind of coming, maybe not fully out of the blue because he's always had that pedigree being a really high pick, but the level to which he's improved on it so drastically is really what's intriguing to me. And it's been just a whole toolkit wide improvement. We're looking at the skills progression here. All of this is stuff that matters in fantasy: finishing ability, off puck offensive support, entry offense, entry efficiency. It's just everything. He's just figuring it out in real time and being able to see that. And if you're a fantasy player, maybe taking advantage of it too, it seems like a great time to hop on the Nemec bandwagon for sure, especially with how he's, maintained his spot on PP1 with Hamilton returning.
Yeah, I love to see that. And that has been a little bit surprising, just because, Hamilton and Hughes, right? They, Keefe was showing like he would have one or the other, right? And then all of a sudden you got Nemec up here. Really nice to see. But it's, imagine like the coach's confidence, what that can do for a player. You know what I mean? Like get out there. It's okay to make mistakes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that his man-on-man defense is a little bit better, because it's got to be something, right? Like if these coaches are logical in any way, it's like, you're seeing an improvement in an area that you didn't like. So now you're feeding that player more ice time. So he's obviously improved there. But like you said, the offense is going really well. I've got him in a couple spots, and I'm happy to have him, right? I'm not dropping. Like, again, this is a guy could be like a 4th or 5th defenseman on your squad, but the underlying metrics show a player that could do more, right? If given more opportunity. And you look at the Devils as well, how bad the offense has been there with Jack Hughes out. I think once he returns, right, and now we got Timo Meier out as well, but once Jack Hughes returns,
true.
I think, we're looking at an offensive wagon again, and Nemec is going to be hopefully even a better version of himself at that point. So this is a player I'm definitely interested in for fantasy, and I'm glad you brought him up, my man. All right. We have to talk about goalies. Oh God, this is, what? I'm glad you brought goalies.
I was surprised. I was really surprised you didn't knock, because I came to Blake with like a list of around 14 guys, fully expecting him to knock one of the 2 goalies I brought. But the final list, they both made the cut, which I was really, really surprised given the 0G strategy you guys got going here.
You know what? This is for the people. All right. One thing I wanted to do this offseason that I didn't exactly do or get to do is dive in a little bit more on goalies and some of the metrics that matter for goalies, right? We are a fantasy hockey podcast. I guess we got to talk about goalies. Oh my God. So you brought a couple beauties here today, guys. I roster in a bunch of spots. And before we get into these goalies, I'd love to just get your quick thoughts, Louis, on how some of the metrics that you use to evaluate goalies. Like, is it simply like goals saved above expected as a main metric, or, what other metrics are you looking at? And also, how much stock do you put into kind of the team environment as well?
So for me, I'm happy you're asking this because I actually had to cut the goalie portion of my most recent Spar article because it would have been like 4,000 words if I didn't. But yeah, so essentially the way I quantify goalies is it's a sort of expected goal calculation, and it's similarly to the skaters, bringing it into one number in terms of standings points contributed. So what I look at is taking all of the shots that a goalie faces, removing the ones that obviously miss the net. I've seen a lot of models that do incorporate those, and that one really bothers me. But what you need to do, in my opinion, you look at all the shots that a goalie faces, account for the fact that they hit the net, which inflates the XG values, and accounts for the ones that kind of miss. And then you get to a point where you see how many goals they would have saved above expected over a certain amount of time, take into account league trends for goal scoring, and see how that increases their team's winning probability. And then you can easily convert that into standings points. That's as I won't get more complicated than that because then the math starts getting a little funky with logistic functions. But essentially, it's just again how good are goalies at stopping shots on average, and that's the way I measure it. As for fantasy, it does get more complicated because yeah, as you said, you got to take into account if they're facing more shots. One thing I looked at actually, and we'll talk about for Greaves, but what I like to weigh is teams that leak a lot of shots, but don't leak a lot of expected goals. That way you get your points for shot volume, but the likeliness of them getting negatives for goals, and as a result as well, wins, is improved in your favor. So that's always one thing I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's a gap for me for sure. Like I like the way I evaluate goalies, but it's like fast food. You know what I mean? I'm like quickly like glancing over certain things, but if I really want to do the best work, I need to do what you're talking about. Like I need to identify those goalies in those situations that you've described. So I'm excited to get into it with you, my man. Bless you. Thank you for your service. Let's talk about the first goalie here. Darcy Kuemper of the Los Angeles Kings, a guy who was a 0G hero last year. We loved having this guy on our roster. I had him on 5 teams by the end of the year. It was really nice stuff. Ooh. And we've got a really nice data viz here. This is something new for you at LB Hockey, one of the free tools that you offer. So anybody could go get this. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about Darcy Kuemper and what we're looking at here?
Okay. First, the Steals and Chokes one is not free, unfortunately. Sorry to say.
I pay for it, so I think everything's free, but I actually pay. I don't know.
There are a couple new free ones though, if you guys want to check it out. But yes, this one specifically. So Darcy Kuemper, I have him in a couple leagues as well. Love this guy in fantasy because he's on LA, which is a solid team, but still he can get enough shots, and he's clearly the starter there. He's a guy that it baffles me that his record is 10-6-5 so far to start the season. Insane that he has more losses than wins because, as I said, the Kings are a better team than that. And he's the 4th ranked goalie in our model this season. Like, just overall, very well-rounded. He doesn't really have a lot of flaws in the way he plays. Like, his vision is pretty solid. His rebound control is good. For 35, his athleticism is phenomenal. And he's very consistent on a night-to-night basis. And looking at the steals and chokes report here, he literally led the league in steals last year. So already you got a consistent, well-rounded goalie who has a sort of game-breaking ability, which is huge for fantasy because then you're getting really high output nights with wins, potentially shutouts, and just generally, if they're stealing games, that means they're facing a lot of the volume and they're getting wins. So that's everything you want in a fantasy goalie, right? And he did all of that while only having 2 chokes in the entirety of 2025. Like, he had none last season after the calendar turn. He's only got 2 so far this year. Ended the season on, I think, that's a 7-game run of steals. And this year, he's still got a pretty favorable ratio. Overall, this is just the exact kind of goalie that I want. He's not in the Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin, Hellebuyck reputation tier. So you won't have to use a high pick to get him or trade a lot to acquire him. But I still think he's very valuable. And now's a good time to kind of get in on the on the ground floor with him because he's not getting as many wins as he definitely should. And because of that, his points are lower. So this is of any goalie I think available right now, this is probably one of the best bang for your bucks that you could get.
Absolutely. I'm such a huge fan of this guy, and I love that. So, how do you define a steal and a choke? Is that just outperforming the expected goals on that particular game?
So yeah, so essentially imagine a game where a goalie faces what, let me get the actual definition here. It's essentially when they have when they save more goals than expected relative to their team's win differential.
I see. Okay.
So if, let's say, the team wins 3-2, so they win by 1 goal, but the other team was expected to score 4 goals given the chances of their stuff, then that would be a stolen win for the goalie in nets for the winning team. And you could easily mirror that for a choke, right? Where, let's say, their expected goals was only 1 and the team lost 2-1, then the goalie let in more goals than would have been expected, and as a result it choked for the team.
Right. Okay. I love that. That's a really interesting stat. And how, and we'll talk about this because I think you have something with Jet Greaves as well in the team environment there. But with LA's team environment, do you think that that is something that benefits Darcy Kuemper, or is he having to outplay his environment a lot, or is it kind of good environment and good goalie on top of that equals like a guy you should probably be rostering, pretty highly in your fantasy leagues?
I think it's a combination of both being solid. Like, I never would have expected a guy like Kuemper to have to steal so many games or just do so.
Right.
Like, a lot of the times, for example, in the first few years that I started tracking this, usually Saros was leading the pack, and I think he still is this year. I think he's got the most chokes with 6, or sorry, not most chokes, most steals with 6. And because you usually see goalies that are on teams that are, maybe okay, around mid, kind of, because then they have the opportunity to surpass their team not being as good. But Kuemper being on an already pretty established playoff team and being able to still steal a lot of games is really impressive to me. And that's kind of why he jumps out so much, because he's in a good environment and he's, even with that, outperforming it already. It's really a nice mix. And to me, he's a lock for Team Canada and their goaltending situation there at the Olympics. And it's just kind of crazy that he doesn't have a better reputation that would allow him to be more known and have more stuff. So I think it's the prime candidate for acquire Kuemper, because you won't regret it right now.
Yeah, I like that. And like you said, it's not like you're going to have to give up a bunch. This is a guy you can sort of throw in and maybe like a 2-for-2 trade if you're looking at getting better at the goalie situation. So there you go. I love that. Let's talk about the second goal you brought to the table. Jet Greaves, one of the best names in hockey. I love to see it. Yeah, this is a guy that if you had him, at the end of last year, he might have helped win you your fantasy leagues. This guy went buck wild at the end of last year. And I think he's had a really good start to this year. I think he's the 1A there in Columbus. And it's been nice to see. Talk to me about Jet Greaves and what your expectations are, and also the team environment there in Columbus.
Yeah, so now we're getting into the opposite type of environment relative to Kuemper. Is another guy where his record 7-6-5. What are we doing here? Because this has been a top 10 goalie in the league, maybe even arguably top 5 if you include the end of last year's sample, just with how phenomenal he's been playing for them, and it's just unbelievably unlucky to be where he is record wise. He definitely has an opportunity to kind of pump up the save volume, as I mentioned, as Columbus faces the most shots against per game of any team in the league so far this season. Unfortunately, the actual danger of those shots is also quite high. So, the average shot, expected goals per shot, is a little bit more favorable, and the volume is there. It's just you'd wish that the threat level wasn't quite as much. Right. I wonder how, I don't think Marchenko was out for super long, but having one of your stars out for a little bit probably didn't help with his record. I'd have to check to see what it actually was during that stretch, but it's probably that kind of play. The thing, though, that is pretty intriguing to me and kind of comforts me in thinking that he might be able to, make a way out and get a positive record by the end of the season, despite Columbus's defensive woes, is how excellent of a scrambler he is. So we look at, this is the comparison atlas here, but just with the one goalie version, we could see at the top how much he kind of dwarfs all the other goalies in terms of how athletic he is, his scrambling ability, how his performance on high pressure situations and saves in those situations. like he can bail out the poorest defense in front of him so often in high danger situations that I do think the environment, despite not being favorable for any goalie, is kind of okay for how he plays the Nets specifically. And that's intriguing to me. And I do think, he's just shown to be so well overall at the NHL level since coming up last season that it's hard for me not to prop him up and praise him a little bit.
Yeah, it's good to hear kind of some of those underlying things and see what he is actually good at. Like I love you've got this badge here, the wow factor, and he's kind of showing out at that. Is that's to do with his athleticism? Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. All the wow factor, I'm pretty sure, is a mix of high danger saves, agility, scrambling, all of those things where you're like, how did that not go in? Was he able to kind of string a few of those crazy saves together and prevent the puck? And that's exactly what he is. And that's while keeping pretty respectable consistency, anticipation, all of that. None of those are particularly low. They're around league average. But just how he's able to play on those high danger plays is really, really impressive to me. And again, it blends with the environment well enough for him. I think, I should check exactly to see how Merzlikins is doing, but I'd assume nowhere near as well as Greaves so far this season. And it makes sense with how their toolkits are.
It's interesting to me, the two goalies that you brought to the table, because they're kind of stark opposites, aren't they? You've got a guy like Jet Greaves who has to catch bullets in his teeth to get this team some wins. And then you got a guy in Darcy Kuemper who's this slow and steady wins the race, and he's outperforming an already good defensive environment. So for fantasy, for me, like I like safe. I like a guy like Darcy Kuemper, but it's also so important to identify these goalies like Jet Greaves who are, potentially stealing games that are massively outperforming the environment, that are like, Jacob Markstrom's done that in the past. He's another goalie to me that's like, really athletic, and he's never kind of out of position, or if he is, he's never out of the play fully because of his kind of effort level and athleticism. So it's just interesting to me that that's the type of goalie Jet Greaves is, because what happens if Columbus's team metrics get a little bit better? What happens if they do shore up that defense? What if they were kind of lower on the, the team environment there, and that's going to regress positively? Now you got a guy who, is already stealing games, who maybe doesn't have to face as many high danger chances. So I don't know. Do you have Jet Greaves anywhere?
I don't have him in any leagues. The way I'm currently running is I've won 20 by 20 league, which is insane, by the way, because then you have like the entire NHL rostered, and we only have one goalie slot in there, but I'm running Swayman and Sorokin, so I don't have either of those guys. And then my other main league, it's I have Kuemper, Wolf, and actually similar style of Jet Greaves, Brandon Bussey there. So the way I usually run is kind of one safe, one maybe more aggressive, and then whoever starts off the year pretty well, I kind of ride with that until it stabilizes.
Yeah, man, I got him in one spot, just my dynasty league. I was able to get Jet Greaves, and no one was really on him for some reason. So it was kind of a gamble that ended up paying off. I think he's going to be the number one goalie there moving forward. It makes sense to me. So get some Jet Greaves in your life. Again, amazing name. You have a kid, and you're like, well, what are we naming our kid? Like Jet. Like, yeah, and like they both just agreed on that. Or did like the husband, like the wife wasn't in the room, he's like, his name's Jet, all right, and then puts it down and then just signs it. I don't know.
Tragic he didn't get drafted by Winnipeg, man. I'm just saying.
You know what? He's a young man. I mean, he could spend some time there. That would be sick, actually. Jet Greaves on the Jets. There's something funny. Anyways, all right, let's move on. That is all we have for this show. I really appreciate you coming here and hitting us with that knowledge there, Louis. Always a great time having you on. I'm going to have to get you on again here. We'll wait for a little bit more time, get some more data, and we could check in on some of these players. I'd also like to have you on maybe at the end of the season, and we can look at our players that we talked about at the beginning of the year and kind of see what happened with them. Because something I love, and you must love this too, is when Corey Schneider releases all that data, and we get the full kind of package. And then I think that happens around like end of January, February or something like that. But that's when I've been
pretty furiously refreshing the game logs that he posts, because that's what I need as the raw data for the LB hockey stuff. Shout out to Corey. He's the best. The work he does, phenomenal. But yes, like yesterday in particular. So I mentioned I have a few Sharks fans that are friends of mine. And I've been waiting to increase the Sharks sample so we can get those Celebrini numbers up there. And I think he dropped like 5 Sharks games in a 24-hour span yesterday or the day before. And it's been great.
You were loving life. Yeah. I'm like a bit dumber. So like, I like it when it's all kind of just in one place, like instead of going through the game. Like I go through that because, I want to know myself, but like, I like to look at everything in one place. And that's what I love about your stuff so much too, is because it's all right there. So yeah, before I let you go, why don't you tell the people a little bit about LB Hockey, what they can get there and what you're up to here moving forward.
Yeah, so you can find all of the tools that we showed here and all the articles that I mentioned on LB Hockey. So that's lb-hockey.com. I'd like to think that we're pushing the envelope a lot in terms of what we can do with hockey analytics, the different tools that we have, the type of research, the articles. We had was it last year? We had it, or earlier this season, we had an article that ended up turning into a conference paper for the Linköping Hockey Analytics Conference. I actually have the book right here, made it into the proceedings. So it's to the point where we're getting published now. So it's great. As with all the other players that we mentioned, get in on the ground floor with LB Hockey right now. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think we're getting some pretty solid work done. And I'd like to think it's pretty affordable too. If you want to get a tryout going, just, buy a month, play around with the tools. If you like it, keep going. If not, no harm, no foul, But yeah, this, I think it's a pretty nice space to explore what we can do with stats and hockey.
Absolutely, buddy. And I don't even think it's the ground floor. You're moving up pretty damn quick, buddy. But I was in on the ground floor last year.
It's true.
All right. And I feel good about that. But LB Hockey is some really awesome stuff. You got to check it out. I look at it every single day when I'm valuing players, and you should too. Okay. So all Louis stuff is going to be linked in the description here. But it's been awesome to have you, my man. Thank you so much. And that's all we got for this episode here, folks. Hopefully it got you, some value, made you a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard from today came from lbhockey.com. Oh, yeah. And Natural Stat Trick as well. So definitely check out lbhockey.com if you like winning at fantasy hockey. All right. Many thanks to my brother, Matt Creamer, for creating the music for the podcast. But that's it, folks. Celebrate your day. Bye for now.